A high plateau, like an island in the heart of the African continent. An impregnable fortress of rock which has saved the country from colonization and assimilation by foreign powers. That is Ethiopia. And this film tells its story, the amazing story of a yesterday that goes back thousands of years, and of a tomorrow full of promise. Scarcely any other country in the world contains such varied geological formations as Ethiopia. The gigantic mountains, many of them rising steeply and unexpectedly out of the plain, conceal numerous volcanic lakes, unexplored relics of volcanoes long since dead, recalling the birth pangs of Africa. But rock doesn't dominate the scene everywhere. There are wide valleys as well, and rolling hills with rich volcanic soil. Here, cattle and sheep find green pastures, and here the peasants grow the teff to make their daily bread, the local injera, and many other cereals. In this mountain world of changing scenes, the dread equator becomes a harmless neighbor. Although for 9 months on end, one sunny day follows another, some of the springs never dry up. The exceptional altitude of between 6,000 and 10,000 feet brings with it a temperate climate, warm days, fresh nights, and a fertile vegetation. The tree-covered hills keep their rich, dark green color all the year round. Ancient forest giants rise above a mysterious vegetable kingdom seldom touched by the foot of man. Only very much further on, in the lonely south, does the wilderness assert its rights. In Borona, an unexplored area where dry steppe and impenetrable bush meet, the animals have a paradise of their own. The inaccessibility of some areas has become a real blessing to the wild denizens of the bush. You still meet them at every step, the herds of kudus with their pointed horns, and the long-legged gazelles, which will sometimes overcome their inborn shyness and yield to the temptation of curiosity. Ethiopia is still reputed to be the richest reservoir of animals for the zoological gardens of the world. The inexhaustible stock of elephants enjoys special protection from the government. More than 500 elephant herds enjoy an unharassed existence on paths which they have trodden for decades. In these spaces devoid of human beings, there is an almost unreal peace which is hardly ever broken by hunters seeking trophies or prey. The philosophical marabou is always left in peace, and even the vulture knows that he may not be highly esteemed, but enjoys too the protection of the game reserve. The Ethiopian giraffes, wandering in herds of up to 20 through the hot and shimmering bush, are among the most beautiful and colorful of their species. In contrast to the other countries of this continent, water is only a minor problem. Numerous springs rise from the rock walls and unite into rivers which traverse the country in all directions. One of these rivers is the biblical Gion, the Blue Nile, whose waters take on a brown, earthy color immediately after the rainy season. Forced to follow a roundabout course, the Blue Nile winds its way through deep, precipitous gorges. Fed by several tributaries flowing from the Ethiopian Massif, it swells the waters of the White Nile, to which Ethiopia contributes the largest share. A few kilometers from Lake Tana, an important source of the headwaters of the Nile, the torrential waters of the Blue Nile display their latent energy in an incomparable waterfall. Over steep cliffs, the water drops more than 150 feet. The tossing whirlpools, sparkling spume, and dancing rainbows form one of nature's most beautiful spectacles, the Blue Cataracts. On the shores of Lake Tana, the second largest lake in Africa, you still find the perfect charm of a mode of life untouched by Western civilization and modern technical developments. From the papyrus reeds that grow in great profusion in every bay, the local ferrymen build their Talakwas, boats that are as light as feathers and float upon the water like corks. Just as in the times of the old emperors, the Talakwas deal with the minor passenger traffic to the Holy Island in Lake Tana, where some of the former rulers lie buried. Relics of the old imperial civilizations are to be found in the north of the country, where early immigrants from northern parts built up a strong and flourishing empire. These immigrants, some of them of Semitic and Hamitic origin, are looked on as the founders of Ethiopia. Their capital was Aksum, which is still venerated today as a holy place. The symbol of Aksum, and an unsolved mystery for all archaeologists, is the leaning obelisk, a granite monument hewn from a single block. Its ornamentation represents a tower of many stories. At the foot of the obelisk are the outlines of a symbolic door. This obelisk was erected 3,000 years ago, a heathen monument in honor of a dead king. The foundation of what is now the Church of St. Mary in Aksum also dates back to the days of the Old Testament. Its history is closely linked with the introduction of Christianity in the 4th century, and even today it is a center of spiritual life. The rulers, who in the 16th century made Gondar their residence, developed a style of architecture which molded Moorish elements into an original expression of Ethiopian sentiment. The most impressive building of this period is the palace of the mighty Fasil. He and his sons built palaces and castles which are among the finest relics of the imperial past. If you judge the different stages of civilization as they are reflected in the life and customs of the people, you will here make a startling discovery. The little bathing castle of Fasilidas, built in the middle of a large swimming pool, a perfectly preserved testimony to a refined way of life. Ethiopia is the land of old churches and monasteries. Many of them are quite intact and tell of the Christian tradition of a people whose culture has from the beginning been closely linked with the church. Today, just as in the past, monks and priests live here, strict guardians of the Orthodox faith. The greatest wonders from the Ethiopian past are the rock churches. No encyclopedia in the world will give you information about these almost unknown buildings. With their ornamental, symbolic doors and windows, they belong, like the pyramids and the Acropolis, to the unique creations in the history of mankind. It was a king named Lalibela who, about the year 1000, gave the order that churches should be hewn into the rock. The lonely mountain massif chosen for this purpose lies at the end of a 3 days arduous trek by mule. The whole complex of 13 buildings is a bewildering labyrinth of caves and passages in all directions. Any stranger would get lost in the darkness of the mountains. The favorite retreat of priests and pilgrims is St. Mariam. Teachers and pupils meet in the forecourt of the church for communal study of the ancient scriptures. Instead of the Latin of the Roman Catholic liturgy, in the Orthodox liturgy, Ge'ez is used, a predecessor of the Amharic language. None of the churches of Lalibela are buildings in the ordinary sense. They are monoliths, churches hewn out of solid rock. With incredible technical skill, they were carved out of the mountain on which they rest and are an integral part of the rock. The interior of this church, which is dedicated to Our Lady, contains a number of colored reliefs, all in the shape of the cross. The stone walls are decorated with life-size statues of saints. Medhani Alem, Savior of the world, the largest of the 13 churches. A gigantic stone block that was carved out of the mountain to a depth of 33 feet. Like all the others, Methane Alem is also hewn out of solid rock. Even the technical engineers of the 20th century cannot but wonder at the way in which this rock has been transformed by sweat and toil. Abar Libanos, protected by a natural roof provided by the mountain, was driven sideways into the rock. A tangle of dark passages leads to the most recent building of this glorious epoch, the rock cross of St. George. This unique creation has become a permanent symbol of an invincible faith. Having pursued the traces of history, you suddenly come face to face with the Ethiopia of today. Of recent years, the country has absorbed the elements of modern existence in order to keep pace with the requirements of world economy. The sugar plantation of Wanji is a good example of the widespread cooperation with foreign capital. In the valley of the Awash, on rich soil and under a burning sun, the sugarcane grows for mile after mile. For practical reasons, it is processed on the spot. More than 3,000 laborers work on this plantation, and the output of the continuous process of production satisfies the needs of the whole population of 20 million. While Ethiopia's sugar production caters only for the home market, coffee is one of its major exports. Did you know that this popular berry is named after a district of Ethiopia? The province of Kaffa can claim to be the original home of the brown bean, whose ripe red berries are harvested twice a year. Here, coffee grows completely wild in shady and humid forests. After a few months, the tender plant is expertly transplanted with a ball of earth. Recent efforts and scientifically tested growing methods are gradually transforming the original coffee fields and are developing strains of coffee whose products are in constant demand from the greatest coffee merchants of the world. A fine aroma and intensive fragrance are the special features of Kaffir coffee. Fruit from Ethiopian orchards is almost unknown in other countries. This is because until a short time ago, people did not go beyond what was needed to satisfy their local needs. The huge fruit plantations in the east and in the south, which have been carefully planned and laid out, promise better and better harvests with every season. There is no danger of sudden climatic changes, so this new export can thrive undisturbed. Here, lemons and oranges compete with mandarins the size of a man's fist. On the branches of the grapefruit trees, these giants among citrus fruits grow to the size of a child's head. From the earliest days, the Ethiopian people have gained their livelihood mainly from agriculture and all that goes with it. There are several times more head of cattle than there are humans, and these large herds, together with the yield of the soil, constitute the basis of the nation's economy. In the course of thousands of years, the different kinds of cattle have adapted themselves to the varying conditions of the country. The herds, in the vast spaces of the Ogaden, have grown accustomed to the frugal life of the steppe. Every 2 days, they trek long distances to the watering places, and each time their arrival recalls a scene of biblical days. Little has changed here in Jijiga since that time. Water is drawn from the earth in simple leather containers. On the bush-covered plain, cattle is tough and sturdy. These animals lead as free and independent an existence as their wild predecessors. But there lurks a vicious enemy which threatens the Ethiopian cattle as well as any others: rinderpest. Until a few years ago, thousands of cattle were killed annually. Where man and beast live in such close community and dependence upon each other, epidemics are a menace to life itself. Since the vaccination of cattle has been made compulsory by law, all cattle within reach have been brought to the vaccination centers. Vaccination is done with a special goat serum, which promises long immunity and is actually much less painful than many an ox would like you to think. Ethiopia remained a purely agricultural country, it would never have been able to emerge from its geographical isolation. The technical achievements of the modern world had to be summoned to help, to form links with the rest of the world, and to open up the country. The Ethiopian Airlines was set up, a great feat of civil aviation in this mountainous atmosphere, which, in the 10 years of its existence, has been one of the most successful ventures of the government.
This is Holloway Radio. Will you please give me your position over the radar, Baker? Over.
Holloway Radio, this is Easy Ter 3 at 10,000 feet of Victor. 309 Zebra.
And as we happen to be on the move, what about a trip to the New Flower? This is not a recently discovered plant, but the Amharic name for the capital, Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa certainly deserves this romantic name. It is one of the most charmingly situated towns anywhere, and at the same time, it is the intellectual, political, and economic center of the country. It is also the center of tourism and of communications, and from here, the most colorful airline of the world maintains regular services to 26 points within the country and to the main airports of the Orient. The city of Addis Ababa is only a few miles away from the airport, and on coming there in search of adventure, you may be surprised to find a completely modern metropolis. If you are accustomed to living in a big city, you will feel quite at home. Asphalt streets, massive office blocks, and no room to park. For this is the turbulent meeting place of all conceivable makes and models of cars. As in England, you drive on the left. As you explore the city, which with only 400,000 inhabitants covers an area approximately the size of Paris, you will come across a lot of very pleasant things in a very pleasant way. The theater is there, as well as your comfortable hotel. And if you are anxious to meet people, a visit to the YMCA won't cost you anything. The influence of the Christian tradition is very noticeable in Addis Ababa, where modern churches dominate the city. The mighty structure of the Church of the Holy Trinity, with sepulchral vaults where the mortal remains of the imperial family will be laid. Standing alone on a hill, the mausoleum of Menelik II can be seen from afar. Menelik ruled at the turn of the century, when Ethiopia stood on the threshold of a new age. The whole population remembers this former ruler with gratitude. His monument stands right in the center of the town. for it was he who founded the new flower in 1878. The present ruler has continued the work of his predecessor and has made Addis Ababa into an imposing city. Unlike former periods, when the greater part of town building depended upon imports, now Ethiopia, from her wealth of mineral resources, much of it still unexplored, provides more and more of her construction material. The mountainous country itself is the town planner's most valuable ally. It provides suitable and durable building material, and in addition, a steady supply of limestone and other materials for the production of cement. Automatic installations working non-stop process the raw material, and the finished product flows straight from the factory into the cement bag. Other branches of the economy, which were brought to a standstill by the late war, have been started up again everywhere. First, all the opportunities offered by the hidden wealth of the country were explored. Almost overnight, the state tobacco monopoly took charge of the needs of the smoker. Only a short step was needed from the production of hides from the large numbers of cattle to the manufacture of leather, and another from the manufacture of leather to the mechanized production of shoes. The textile industry is making great efforts to satisfy the requirements of the home market. The cotton mills in Diridawa are working day and night shifts. Steered by a steady hand, the Industrial Revolution took hold of Ethiopia. Imperceptibly, it molded the simple native, living close to nature, into a new and unfamiliar type, the industrial worker. But the mastermind that is the driving force behind all this pursues its aim with the prudence of an experienced pedagogue. Slowly and steadily, the youth of the country is being made familiar with its future task. Public opinion is kept informed of these developments. Journalists and editors report on the events of the day in newspapers written in Amharic, English, Arabic, and French. The Western model is easily discernible in the new mode of life, but it is not just being slavishly copied. For the soil in which the future grows is a tradition which dates back 3,000 years and which is never forgotten. Mass production meets the requirements of today, but folk art and handicrafts link the present with the past. Traditional ornaments and utensils are made from the ivory of tusks of elephants and buffalo horn. The women are expert in the traditional art of carpet making. at first seem surprising, but the shama, a part of Ethiopia's national costume, does not prevent any woman from taking a liking to modern fashions. Keep it up, ladies, for practice makes perfect. In case you have to make a telephone call, the exchange in Addis Ababa will quickly put through any international call you want. The days of isolation are definitely over. There are connections with any town at home or overseas.
I'd like to connect you. Hello, Asmara. Asmara. Hello, Asmara. Hello. Addis Ababa. Hello, Kutrale.
The setting up of the telephone and telegraph installations involved unforeseen technical difficulties. But the initial stage has been passed. The network of communications which embraces the country and its people is becoming ever closer. Of equal importance was the development of the road system. A network of vitally important roads radiates from the capital. Road transport is on the move, and you can drive from Addis Ababa to the Red Sea, hundreds of miles away. On the Red Sea lies Eritrea, a province of Ethiopia which was returned to the mother country only a few years ago by a decision of the United Nations. With this reunification, which removed a political shadow from the map, much has changed in Eritrea. The new Orthodox Church and the new mosque are both gifts of the emperor to followers of the two faiths in Massawa. A country of deep religious tradition, religious tolerance gives the right of full freedom of conscience to every citizen. The new schools in Asmara are built according to the latest developments of international architecture. The same can be said of the hospital, which has been designed on modern lines. The scorching heat on the coast of the Red Sea has earned the port of Massawa the name of the Gate of Hell. For Ethiopia, however, Massawa is the gateway to the world, the vital link with international goods traffic. Ships from all over the world tie up at the quays. This is a meeting place for trade and commerce between different countries. Indispensable imports are unloaded, and more raw materials are exported. At first sight, this may look like a sun-drenched polar landscape, but it is a view of the huge mountains of salt from the salt beds which extract the valuable mineral from the Red Sea. The high salt content of the water forms the basis of a profitable industry. The coarse raw salt is obtained by evaporation. The chief forms employed in this process are sun and time. Both work free of charge in Massawa. As salt is required, these mountains are worked like an open coal field, and hundredweight by hundredweight, the salt is loaded and shipped off to countries where it is needed. In spite of all these serious preoccupations, pleasure is never neglected. Holidays are set aside for recreation, especially in Addis. The place where the town dweller can best enjoy his hours of leisure is called Debre Zeit and lies only a few miles from the capital. It is, as always, a thoroughly international rendezvous. Here, men and women from all over the world meet. Debre Zeit lies at the edge of a volcanic lake, surrounded by rolling, hilly country. The shores are enlivened by the original feathered residents, who don't appear to be unduly disturbed by the bustle of weekend visitors. Crested divers, red mascal birds, and majestic pelicans. The splendid, colorful sight of the many visitors in their Sunday best induces a holiday mood. And the sailing enthusiast realizes with some surprise that up here at an altitude of more than 6,000 feet, one really can sail close to the wind. Almost the highest sailing club in the world, the members still have some difficulty in coping with the vicious squalls which blow across from the hollow of the famous Hyena Valley. The weekly swimming lessons are a popular pastime for the youthful pupils of Ethiopia's first modern swimming school. The majority of Ethiopians are inland and mountain people and have therefore never been water enthusiasts. Here you can see them and judge the effect of their training. The history of education in this country is a sociological phenomenon. The Menelik II School, founded in 1905, and the Tafari McConnell School of 1922 were the first modern schools. Now there is hardly a town or village without its school, as well as the numerous traditional church schools. The University College, where young Ethiopians are prepared for scientific and academic studies, has become the intellectual center of the rising generation. The training of an intellectual elite is one of the most revolutionary measures. 16% of the national income is spent on this task alone. Often, the students will visit the National Museum, where relics of the political and cultural past are being collected. The crowns of former emperors and kings. In the center, the showpiece of Menelik II. This collection is priceless. $400,000 is the value of this crown, which once belonged to an unknown Ras or king. Near this museum, where tradition fills the air, a young painter is at work. He has studied abroad for many years and has now returned in order to combine the technique he has acquired with the spirit of his homeland. In these pictures, which show a modern influence, the colors and the brilliance of a sunny country come to life. The crucifixion, Aida, and an Orthodox priest. The study of the past always takes you back to the origins of the Christian tradition. The oldest writings that have been preserved are Bibles from the 13th century. They are written on parchment, and their decorations recall the artistic work of the monks in the monasteries of the West. All the illustrations, which are characterized by formal and colorful ornamentation, are strictly symbolic. The central figure is always Christ. This man who, as a man and as emperor, has won the admiration of all peoples, has never, despite his great task, forgotten the fate of the unfortunate. Everywhere is told the story of his generosity. Wherever he meets distress, a poor sick man or a child of poor parents, he pays for the treatment himself. Often the necessary operation is performed in a hospital that bears his name. For the emperor, the medical care of his subjects is not merely a social concern, but a personal interest. Quite frequently, he is present in the theater in order to watch an operation. life, the emperor has taken an unflagging interest in all aspects of human existence. He does not live in majestic isolation. He lives among his people, who love and venerate him. This is the Imperial Palace. Every year in September, an enchanting ceremony is enacted in the palace grounds. It is the Festival of the Cross, the Haile Festival. The ceremony revolves around ancient and biblical history connected with the true cross of Christ. The priests pray for God's blessing and for the well-being, strength and health of the emperor in the coming year. In high symbolism, the Abuna presents floral crosses. The spiritual dances and songs of the priests provide the setting for this festive ceremony. The religious and historic background is revealed at the main Maskal festival, which marks both the end of the rainy season and the beginning of the Ethiopian New Year. The whole population turns up with long sticks and crosses of flowers to symbolize the blossoming of the countryside and the discovery of the true cross by the Empress Helena. It has been prophesied that the cross of Christ shall come to Ethiopia. In the middle of the square, as in all other towns and villages, a pile of logs, a damara, is built up. The Archbishop gives his benediction, and, led by the priests, the Emperor and all dignitaries walk 3 times round the damara. Tens of thousands of inhabitants are already waiting in their white shemas on the edge of the square. They have come in groups from every quarter of the town. They form into a procession and file past the emperor and the imperial family for hours, singing and dancing. And everyone throws his stick on the wooden pile until there is one enormous pile. Following the example of the Empress Helena in the Holy Land 1,600 years ago, a huge bonfire is lit in the evening. That is the moment for which the young people have been waiting. They watch the spectacle with shining eyes and celebrate the festival of the year with happy abandon. All the bells of the capital rang out when the 25th anniversary of Haile Selassie I's succession to the throne was celebrated in a symbolic ceremony. The Jubilee of the 225th ruler of Ethiopia does honor both to the man and his work. In it, 2.5 decades of laborious progress reach their zenith in a festive occasion. In the morning, in brilliant sunshine, the emperor and the empress leave the palace. They are on their way to the Jubilee Mass in St. George's Church, where Haile Selassie I was crowned emperor in 1930. A motorized escort accompanies the procession through the triumphal arches that span the streets, which are lined by a dense crowd of thousands of people. On the church terrace, the Archbishop is waiting to receive the imperial couple. Three times, the Ligaba taps the ground with his staff, the signal to the guests that the emperor and empress are about to enter the church. The senior representatives of the country take their seats. The twin thrones stand opposite the altar. The Mass begins. The Archbishop and the bishops, 13 altogether, in their precious vestments. Jointly, they celebrate one of the greatest and most solemn masses that has ever been celebrated. Dignitaries of Ethiopia, foreign government representatives, and the diplomatic corps are present. Not far from the imperial couple, their grandchildren. Towards the end of the Orthodox ceremony, the Archbishop presents the Bible to the Emperor and the Empress, who, according to ancient custom, kiss the Holy Book. Then the highest dignitary of the Church recites the final prayer. May God give to the Emperor, who is a man of God, all that he desires in his heart.
Haile Selassie, have a level, have answered us by two. Sarot Alatu, Tahagaru, Futuna, Bahila Maskalula, Exima Yasu Christos, Kirurana, Laikunu. Jaheri Akur Mato, if I Musalo, Muratola Mutr, Jaheri Akur Mato, if I Musalo, Muratola Mutr. Jaheri Akur Mato, if I Musalo, Muratola Mutr, Grakuma, Hayakam, Time, Rosagahlo, and Hoskudus. وثرى حل مسلم مسلم كلكم
A hymn sung by the priests greets the emperor as he leaves the church. The hidden treasure chest of old Ethiopia now displays the accumulated splendor of thousands of years of imperial tradition. In the purple-red state coach, the imperial couple set out on their triumphal procession through the town. Next to the coach marches the personal bodyguard in traditional costume with ceremonial swords drawn. Warlike horsemen in their traditional armor with lions' manes and shields made of rhinoceros hide represents the old tribal princes. The cheering of the people continues all along the route. High, vibrant notes issuing from thousands and thousands of throats accompany the scarlet coach on its journey. The streets are overcrowded. The people are allowing full play to their enthusiasm. unflagging energy, the drum major marches at the head of the colorful festival band, followed by an unending procession of units of the Army, Air Force, and bodyguard. After more than 3 hours, this incomparable procession comes to an end. It has got back to the Gibi, the palace. The state coach stops in front of the steps leading up to the portal, and Emperor and Empress return to their residence, which is already preparing for yet another event. A Jubilee banquet in honor of the monarch fills the evening. It unites the imperial family with the highest dignitaries and the diplomatic representatives of other countries round a magnificently decked table. In the place of honor next to the emperor, the archbishop. At the side of the empress, the heir to the throne, Crown Prince Asfawassen. The feast ends on a light and gay note. In the throne room, in the presence of the imperial couple, high society celebrates the occasion by dancing late into the night. The 25th anniversary, coming at the end of a difficult but successful period of government, also marks the beginning of a new epoch in the history of Ethiopia. It was the emperor's personal wish that the festival week should be the brilliant setting for the inauguration of a new political era. The next day, the emperor went in the coronation coach to the newly rebuilt Houses of Parliament. There was an air of tense expectation in the wide forecourt as the emperor mounted the steps of Parliament. Within a year of his accession, he had created this institution and had shared a large part of his absolute power with the representatives of his people through the granting of the 1931 Constitution. In the throne room, as a Silver Jubilee grant, lay a revised constitution to be signed by the emperor. By this democratic act, the personal rights of the individual, freedom of religion, of opinion, and of the press, are, in the name of the emperor, extended and more firmly established. Went to his dais in Parliament. His speech was broadcast to the whole country. The whole of Ethiopia was at this hour listening to this historic speech from the throne, which outlined the policy and the legal basis of future developments.
የሀሳባችን ዋናው ዓላማ የንጉሠ ነገሥት መንግስት ግዛታችን ተወላጅ ዜጎቻችን ሁሉ በመጠናቸው በምክር ቤት ውስጥ በሚገባ እንደራሴ እንዲኖራቸውና በዘርም ሆነ በሃይማኖት በመካከላቸው አንድም ልዩነት እንዳይኖር ለማድረግ ነው። ማናቸውም ኢትዮጵያዊ ትክክል መብት እንዲኖረውና የተወደደ ህዝባችን ሁሉ የአንድ ትልቅ ቤተሰብ ተወላጆች ሆነው በወንድማማችነት እኩል እንዲኖሩ ዘወትር የተከተልነው ዓላማ ነው። በንጉሠ ነገሥቱ መንግስት ግዛት የሚኖሩ ሰዎች ሁሉ ሃይማኖታቸውን ስርዓት አክብረው በነጻነት ለመፈጸም አይከለከሉም። የ25ኛውን የዘውድ በዓላችንን ለማክበር ስላበቃን ፈጣሪያችንን እናመሰግናለን።
Enthusiastic applause greeted the Talaku Meri, the great leader, as he stepped out onto the balcony to the strains of the national anthem. One of the last remaining monarchs of our world, this philosopher on the imperial throne has devoted his whole life to his country. And in the history of Ethiopia, he has been, more than any monarch before him, a tower of strength and the living conscience of his people.